Stationed in York, in the Roman province of Britannia, was the Ninth Roman Legion, an elite fighting force trained as one of the Roman Empire's best armies. In their storied history, they defended Roman sovereignty and ideals, facing immense hardship and loss. For many years, they stayed within Britannia, fighting off the barbarian hordes of the north as they worked to maintain the Roman idea of peace within the borders they held, and behind the comfort and safety that, after their time, would be offered by Hadrian's Wall. However, depending on who you believe, they simply ceased to exist in the official records either after the year 108 AD or 120 AD, at least so far as we can prove. How could this have happened? Were they all exterminated in a war, a rebellion, disease, or famine? Here we have one of the most compelling mysteries of history in the complete disappearance of the Ninth Roman Legion, or the Legio IX Hispania, or Hispana, if you prefer, from the writings at the time, which we'll be discussing tonight on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Geekology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. I am joined by my co-host, Joe Day. How's it going, Joe?
What's up? Glad to be here.
All right, man. Yeah. Uh, it's one of those things. We wanted to do this last week, but hey, life got in the way. It's okay. We're here now. We're here to have fun.
Yep.
So, listeners, just as a reminder, our schedule is to once a month cover one of six categories: cryptozoology, the paranormal, religious strangeness, the weird and the unexplained, true crime, and ufology. This episode was voted on by SG fans on the Priest of the Geeks page on Facebook. So, if you'd like to have a say on our next topic, then please head over there and join. All right. This, as we discussed last time, I was not expecting this one to be chosen. Not because I didn't want to pick it and cover it, because obviously I'm the one who put down the stuff to be voted on. But Joe, like, can you imagine why people voted this over the other stuff we had there?
So I can only think that like this sort of thing, what happened to this group of people and this centering around a Roman legion and all of that is just enough to get people's attention and all of that. It's one of those things for me. Y'all, I signed up to talk about like paranormal stuff and like religious mystery and all of that, not Roman legion. But yeah, no, I was totally new to this. So but in prep, this is the only time that I've ever heard of this. So yeah, I mean, certainly, you think of these historical landmarks and things like that, and these historical groups. I guess it makes sense that people would want to hear more about this.
Yeah. Hey, it's like, your Roanoke situation. Like, what happened to them? And,
Right.
they are records that are kept and maintained for all these legions. And suddenly these guys are just gone. Like, what's going on with that? So you're completely new to this. Uh, I think I first heard about this maybe a decade ago.
Mm.
Just doing research on weird and unexplained stuff, and this propped up, and I'm like, oh, what's
Yeah.
this about? And I was like, oh, well, obviously they just were massacred by barbarians in Britain or whatever. But there's actually so much more to that. That may be one of the answers. So we're gonna head into it. But before we go into that, let's kind of discuss like what the heck a legion was, why they were there in Britain. So, depending on who you're talking to, research historian wise, at this point in history in Rome, their legions were split up into either groups of about 4,800 or 5,200 men. Um, they were all supposed to be Roman citizens and were deployed all around the empire. They would lessen the restrictions, like later on, like hundreds of years past this, to where they would allow non-Roman citizens to be part of their empire. They would hire mercenaries to do their dirty work for them. Not that they never stopped using mercenaries, but they used more mercenaries later on. So at the time of Augustus Caesar, Rome had about 60 legions inside of it. Some estimate it's about 50. That's the thing, once again, about history. Who's right? Well, we really can't tell. We weren't there. We can only hope to trust the people who are recording stuff.
Yeah.
Now for
That's
the
one
night
of the most
specific. Oh,
fascinating
yeah, go
things.
ahead.
That's one of the more fascinating things about something like this is you hit on it. Rome was one of those parts of the world where a lot said, And you like to believe that we know a lot about that part of the world during that time and all of that. But there's still so much about this that, like, depending on who you ask, depending on what source, it could be between this time and this time, or this number and this number, that I think adds to the intrigue and the mystery of it all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, from what I recall, like on a wholly separate topic, the only things we know about druids are written by Roman authorship. So obviously they have their own propaganda they want to send in there. So how would we actually know what druids worshipped and all that? Because most of them were illiterate. They didn't write down their stuff. It's
Right.
kind of, you just have to take leaps of faith on some of this stuff. Since, we can't really send our time archaeologists into the past to see how things actually worked. So for the Knights themselves specifically, they were created in a very large range of time from either 90 BC to 58 BC. We know for sure, specifically, that they participated in Julius Caesar's governance of Gaul in 58 BC, and he would later on launch more campaigns against the people of Gaul after that. But most likely, they were created sometime before then. The reason some people say 90, if I remember correctly from the research I did, was there's might be some hint of them being made for a rebellion or something like that, but we're not entirely sure. It is what it is. Now, they received the Hispana part of their name when they were stationed in the Roman province of Hispania during the reign of Augustus Caesar. And it just kind of stuck, even though I think for the vast majority of their life, they were in Britannia. So there's that. They were brought to Britannia when it became a province of the Roman Empire in 43 AD and remained there for the most part while helping to subjugate the people there. So anything you want to add before we head on?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, in that case, this situation where they're at in time right now is, for the most part, outside of, I think, of a few smaller military campaigns they might have been brought out of Britannia to fight in, they pretty much stuck here. And one of the most popular hypotheses for where they disappeared at was where they were stationed. This would be in either Britain or Scotland. At this point in time, the the Scots were mostly Caledonian, Celtic. I don't know if the Picts were around at this point in time. I'd have to look that up again.
Right.
This is a visual representation of the Roman city of York back in the day, which is where they would have been based at. So the main hypothesis people bring in, when it was popularized, it's like the Eagle of the Ninth or whatever that fiction book was,
Yeah.
written in like the 50s, I'm fairly certain, where, hey, there was a rebellion or an invasion of the Caledonians up north. They went to go suppress it. They got their butts whooped. They were all massacred. And Roman historians, being Roman historians, they said, yeah, we suffered losses and didn't go into specific detail because it would look really bad for PR. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, so it's weird because you're talking about a group that you're one of the most sophisticated um, civilizations of the time, groups of people at the time, and so there would be a thought that within the empire, to say that this supreme fighting force was just demolished is a bad look. But also, this is still at a time where honor shame culture
Mm.
is still very, very prevalent. And so there's a world where a group of guys who faced a stunning defeat doesn't want to show their face again. And so you're talking about a mass relocation in a part of the world that you could very easily get away with hiding and finding a spot to stow away in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is nothing new. in history. And the earliest example I can think of would be the Battle of Carchemish between Egypt and the Hittites, where if you look at the Hittite side of things, like, yeah, we got this total victory. We sent those Egyptians back. You look at the Egyptians, like, we made those losers worship at our feet. And from the actual archaeological evidence, it looks like it was more like a stalemate than any side actually getting a victory. So it's possible this could be a thing. It's like, hey, they were here, we sent them to do their work, and they just weren't good enough, and we're just going to shame them by not even mentioning them anymore,
Yeah.
or what have you. Or maybe the records are just lost. That's another unfortunate part of history, especially well, all over really, but even literate cultures, you don't have everything preserved to this point in time because there's been thousands of years that have passed.
Right. Right. Even the stuff
So,
that, and that's the thing, right? Like there's something alluring about looking at a topic like this from the mystery, the unsolved mystery of it all, but also like taking into consideration the fact that this is a part of history where there wasn't really a thought behind long-term preservation or really the means for long-term preservation of historical documents or things like that, especially for something that was either mysterious. Because here's the thing, right? We'll get into it, but there's a world where something mysterious went down, and they realize, the PR machine realizes, well, wait a minute, this looks bad. It doesn't. We don't know what actually happened to them, but the lens of the world, it's going to look unfavorable on us. So we're just not going to talk about it. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, well said. So, like I said earlier, this is one of the most popular ones, and like where they ended up at. I believe research really started in this in like the 1800s, from what I've read, and like there's people kind of looking over like where these legions went, realize, hey, they just kind of stopped appearing at some point in time. What's up about that? And hey, that's a natural question. You're researching stuff like this, you bring it into the popular culture through fictional media. I've never read these, but I do own them. Do you know Jim Butcher at all, of the
Yeah.
Dresden Files? Yeah, he has his own series where essentially they got taken to another world, and they're now in the kind of this weird world of Pokemon, essentially using them to fight, and they've preserved their Roman culture for these thousands of years. I want to read it so bad, but I keep forgetting that I own them.
Ha.
So that's that. I don't believe that to be the case. I would need sufficient evidence to say there was some giant portal that moved them to an alternate reality or pocket dimension or what have you. So that's it for that. I leave it as one of the more plausible ones, in that, hey, that's where they were stationed. If there was anywhere where they were going to get wiped at, it'd be where they were stationed at. That's its own thing. But moving on, we'll get to the Bar Kokhba revolt. This is the final major. There were some smaller ones along the way. The final major Jewish revolt. It occurred in the years 132 through 135 AD. This was led by a Jewish, some people would say mystic. I don't believe, others said rabbi, and I believe that is erroneous. He was just Jewish, military trained, a man named Simon Bar Kokhba. He attempted to recreate the Jewish state after it was lost in 70 AD. Well, 73 AD, really. 70 AD is when Jerusalem is sacked. 73 AD is Masada, where the final Jewish rebels all commit suicide rather than, be taken by the Romans. The Jewish people are then sent across the Roman Empire. He starts revolts all over the Roman Empire, and for a time even maintains control of Judea until eventually they're almost wiped out. And there's never really been, at least in Roman history, one as well planned as this, a rebellion again from the Jewish people.
Right.
This one is fascinating in that, yeah, it's a possibility. Like, depending on the records, we'll get to one where we know for sure they were around in 120 AD. Before we got there, we thought that they were gone by 108 AD. So there's that gap. This, granted, this 30 some years almost, this could be a compelling reason for why. Joe, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, in looking at the potentials, I think this one only really makes sense because like or is only really in the consideration because of that chunk of time where like there was that it's that window. There's always the one of the things about studying history for those of you that are unaware is you have to accept that anything really for the most part, unless like before a certain point, is going to have happened between such and such a time and such a time. Just the nature of historical records and things like that. So this one, I'm like, because of all the other, and this might be bias coming from the Christian perspective, and having studied some Jewish studies and things like that, it just feels like if this was more of a these paths crossed sort of situation, that there would be something more, you know what I mean? Because this is one of those more like well-known chunks of time, minus that window. I would call this one like only a consideration insofar as we're talking about a similar window of history.
Yeah, I agree. I think if they had gotten such a major advantage over the Roman legions attacking them, that they wiped out or decimated an entire Roman legion, that there would be records left behind from the
Yeah.
Jewish side of things that have said, yeah, this is what we totally did. And I don't see that. But once again, that's also in the midst of immense turmoil. They'd already suffered 70, 73 AD, being scattered
Right.
across the Roman Empire. Then again, they're beaten one final time in their last major assault on the Romans. So maybe records were burnt or what have you. But
And there was a
I don't.
weird amount of historical documentation, I guess is a good way of putting it, around that chunk of time. Like we know a fair bit centered around that chunk of time. And so it just is one of those things that like yeah, I don't I would be more apt to, and we'll get there, to side with the eagle than to go with this.
Yeah, I'll second that. It's possible, but I'd say highly implausible
Yeah.
that this could be the case. So sorry for you, Bar Kokhba fans out there, all 9 of you.
All 9 of you.
Next up on our docket, we have Germania. Now, historically speaking, outside of other things we'll talk about later, if there's going to be a part of the world where the Romans get their butts kicked the most, it's going to be trying to invade and stop those weird yokels up in Germania. 9 AD is Teutoburg Forest. I have to look up the name again, where they essentially almost get massacred, have to fall back and like say, look, like, hey, we done goofed extensively. We're not going to conquer those Germans up there. They're crazy. So
Yeah.
an idea sent out. I mentioned those dates of 108 and 120. The 108 date is from an inscription we found circling the ruins of York, of Roman York, where it says, 108, the Ninth Roman Legion was stationed here. So we know that for a fact. The 120 AD is from this example. As archaeologists, I say we like I was there, archaeologists have found a reference to them being in this location in what would be the region we now call the Netherlands of Germania Inferior, which was their province bordering the rest of Germania, and a town called Novio Magus. I believe it's New Magic or something like that. I'd have to look that up again. Now,
Sounds like that
given
would be, yeah.
yeah, given that the Germans and the Germanic barbarian tribes at that time were always, you know, pulling raids and kidnapping people, and the Romans were no less good in that regard either on their side. It's easy to see how there could have been warfare between these two peoples. The Ninth Roman Legion being not that far removed from here could have potentially been taken sent there on orders to help out, stop a rebellion or stop them from raiding or what have you. What do you think, Joe?
So, if you'll humor me here for a second with
Go for
a
it.
bit of a story. So, I used to live in the Midwest, and specifically up in Minnesota, and I lived in a couple of different parts of Minnesota. Well, the further north that you go, we're talking like up to Duluth, where like in the wintertime, the main form of transportation is snowmobile. Um, I worked at a like a cabin sort of thing. It was like a way station for oil riggers, and I was running the kitchen up there. And so I would hear these guys tell these stories of the Germanic people and like this group of people that we're talking about here from this portion of time. If their stories are to be believed, now everybody's got their legends and all of this kind of stuff. These people were no joke. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like these are the people that when for all of you comic fans, for all of you nerd fans, things like that, in predominantly Marvel, there's this idea of a berserker rage and things like that. That's we're talking about a portion of the world where that kind of mythology is coming from. And so this is one of those areas that if this isn't going to be um, if the answer is not inclined towards the supernatural, right? And um, we're looking at a very tangible answer. This is one of them that I'm like, dude, these guys were a very formidable fighting force and did not pull punches. It wasn't organized. It was savagery. It was bloodthirst. It was not. It was no. There was no such thing as taking prisoners. And so, is there a world where the Ninth Roman Legion is just utterly decimated by these people, or if some of them get out alive, are sent packing in shame? I could I could see it.
And one thing I forgot to mention when we were in the Britain section is the rebellion of Boudica, which happens in the 60s AD. And they fought against her forces, and they got beat miserably and had to flee back home. And one of the worst defeats that the Romans would suffer in that area until they were eventually able to wipe out her forces. So there's historical precedence, granted, many decades removed, for them to be
Right.
beaten by supposedly inferior forces.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like I
And,
said, if the now mind you, we're talking about stories from drunk oil riggers. So it was a good time. Don't get me wrong, but stories. And so if their stories are to be believed, then we're talking about a group of people that like only inferior through the lens of history. You know what I mean?
yes. And once again, they're on their home turf.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as much as I hate bringing up Vietnam, yeah, we won every major battle that our forces were fighting your forces. But the moment that guerrilla warfare came into play, and that's something from American history we failed to learn from, and that we were very successful against the British in that regard, especially in the South. You know the turf better than anyone else, so you can use that to your advantage. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can send out scouts, but they don't know the land as well as someone who's lived there their entire lives.
Right.
So I could easily see something where this happened. Unfortunately, we don't really have too much archaeological evidence to back it up, but not a lot of these answers do either. So we're kind of left in that nebulous state of, once again, we're going to have to just give an answer and hope for the best and eventually be proven wrong when eternity comes,
Right.
or proven right. We'll see. So I can see it happening. I, I mean, if there's any force here, like if we look at this map, where you see the Roman Empire at and where they're not, the region of Germany, every time they tried to go up that way, they'd either get wiped out or things would be inconclusive, but there were very few major victories over the Germanic peoples. You go to the west, we'll get to that in a second, to Parthia and all that. Then you go south. Well, the reason they're not any further than Libya and all that is because there's a bunch of desert there. They really don't care to own it. So that's that. You have anything else before we move on?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So speaking of to the west, we have the Parthian Empire. This is, in historians' eyes, kind of a reimagining of the Persian Empire by the peoples of this land. They took over a very large region of the world, left behind after Alexander the Great had conquered it. And then after he died, it split up into 4 different ways. Well, the Greeks weren't able to control that anymore. So the peoples eventually were able to rise up again, take claim over the land, creating the Parthian Empire. And we see there on this map a green buffer state of Armenia. This is important not only to this story, but also, just Christianity in general. First nation in the world who proclaimed themselves to be Christian. Just a little funny, not funny, fun little tidbit there. So at this point in history, in the second part of this, they're important. The first part is not. The Roman Empire and Parthian Empire were always fighting each other. It's like a 20, 30-year kind of cyclical thing, sometimes a little longer than that. And obviously, so when 2 empires are at each other's throats, well, one's going to want dominance over the other. The Parthians controlled a lot of trade that came from China on the Silk Road. So they could charge outrageous prices and tariffs on that. So the Romans, of course, didn't like that because they wanted to do the same thing. Imagine that economics doesn't change over time.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen? War. And it happened multiple times over. Every now and then, Rome might get the advantage. Other times, the Parthians would get the advantage. Sometimes a Roman emperor would end up having to drink gold. And there you go. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But there's a reason that scene from Game of Thrones exists, because it's actual history. So at this point in time, there are 2 possible times given for when the Ninth Roman Legion could have been there. We had the Roman-Parthian War of 115 to 117 AD, and the War of 161 to 166 AD. If this is the answer, I tend to go with the latter because we do have archaeological evidence of them surviving to 120 AD. Now, whether or not that's like their last dying gasps or something like that, maybe, and they were really wiped out here, who knows? We don't. We're just working on hypotheses here. But specifically the one for 161 through 166, we have records of an entire Roman legion who is not named specifically. And this is why a lot of people look to the Ninth being the one doing this. Being wiped out. And this was as a result of Armenia gaining its pseudo-independence from the Parthian Empire. They became a protectorate of Rome. The Parthians trying to mess with their inner dealings again, so Rome decided to have war with them. A legion went here to Armenia, was wiped out fighting the Parthians. That is why people say this might have been the Ninth. So have at it, Joe.
Yeah, again, I think this is one of those in a squint and cock your head sort of way. There's some precedent here, but from my when researching this and taking a look at what the possibles were, to me this seems like one of the most implausible, only because the historical documents that we do have don't really support this. And it's one of those things that, like, you would have to then try to explain some 30-40 year gap in between these different time periods, that in a situation like this, you would think that there would be some kind of documentation during that time of something else, where it's not just, it just goes quiet for like 30-40 years.
Yeah. And if you also remember the map from earlier, remember where they were stationed?
Mhm.
originally, which would have been York, and for a little time in what is now the Netherlands. This is on the exact opposite side of the Roman world.
Yep.
It is once again possible because Roman legions were expected to fight wherever the heck they were told to go to.
Right.
But yeah, while I do have some sympathies toward this ideas, and like not to give my cards away early, I'm going to say it is for the sake of having an answer.
Mhm.
I don't know for sure. I'm not taking a bullet for this one on flimsy evidence of, hey, we know a Roman legion was wiped out. Well, we lost the ninth at some point in time. Well, we'll just put them there because, hey, they just fit the puzzle pieces together, and
Yep.
I'm going to force that puzzle piece to fit. Because, yeah, once again, as you stated, that is a 40-year gap in between when we have our last archaeological evidence of them and this war.
Right.
So what are you going to do?
Yeah, yeah. I think this, this to me, like I said, just it screams. I need to have an answer, and so like, oh, this makes sense. Let's go ahead and slot the people in there.
Yeah. All right. Our next possibility: decimation by the superiors. Now, we've mentioned the word decimation multiple times over, and we've used it incorrectly in the Roman sense of the term several times. It's okay.
Yeah.
Language evolves. The original intent is that when there was like a rebellion or an army underperformed, or you just really wanted to make an example out of someone, you would order your troops and specific legions or groups or what have you to kill off a tenth of their own. This is something that was done multiple times over. It's kind of expected that you just did it, and too bad for the people who died. You knew what you were signing up for. Now, we've mentioned a couple times before the Ninth did suffer casualties, losses in several battles before. So, is it possible along the way that they lost some major battle, and someone over them said, "All right, guys, kill off 10% of your guys. You're going to decimate them, and we're going to resend you all elsewhere. The Ninth Legion is disbanded." Sure, but I don't find a lot of evidence for this without official records. So, what do you think, Joe?
Um. Yeah. I mean, evidence, no, but when you look at the when you look at the society, is it possible? Sure. Like certainly this is a potential answer. Um it feels again though like there would be some kind of documentation to this.
Yeah. I mean, because that's a bunch of salaries you just lost there. These are, once again, at the time, they're supposed to be Roman citizens. So if there's anyone who's supposed to be protected by the law, it is them in the
Mhm.
empire. Now, even though Roman citizens would still die in these decimations, you would think that there would be some record left behind of saying we had to kill honorable,
Yeah.
Flavius Josephus. Oh, sorry, that's a Jewish guy. Uh, Flavius Marcus Aurelius or whatever. And here's the documentation. Here's what happened. Oh, they had a rebellion or there was a conspiracy to kill a superior officer. We can't have that. Blah, 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 blah. These are all the guys that died. Sure. But once again, sands of time being what they are, if
Yeah.
such an event were to happen, we don't have records of it, which means as a hypothesis thrown forward, I also can't get behind it as much because I would like more evidence to back up my position.
Yeah. I don't even necessarily have the burden of needing an extensive amount of evidence, and part of that's just with the work that the work that I've done in history. I just don't like it's not usually what you get, but there are some things where like if you look at the sum total of the puzzle pieces and you look at the time and the people and the legacy of this group of people and all of that, it just feels like this is one of those where if something like that would have happened, there I think there's a better chance that if it came at the heels of a defeat or something along those lines, it would almost have to come down to a complete and total decimation rather than being like taken out by their own people.
Yeah. So those are our more, let's say, historically scientific possibilities. I didn't put these in an outline because there's really not a lot of evidence to support them. But other people have presented alternate theories and hypotheses of abduction by UFOs. Joe, why would you think this is not a possibility, and why would I agree with you?
Huh? So I don't know, man. You think about this for a second, right? This is an area of the world that is steeped in folklore, in mystery, in a variety of different spiritual um, backgrounds and things like that. I don't know. It's one of those things that you look at that region and the sheer amount of things that make you go, huh, from throughout history or archaeology or different things like that, that I look at this and I'm like, um, could I believe that some mystical force got the attention of aliens and this is an ancient astronaut theory sort of situation? I think that's certainly more plausible than Rome took out their own.
Fair. If you've been in apologetics at any point in time, you've heard of the term God in the gaps.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it gets abused by people who don't know what they're talking about. This is the God in the gaps hypothesis thrown out. They disappeared. What can we do? I'm going to throw in UFOs as an explanation, or I'm going to throw in the fair folk as a representation, or druids rose up and they used their magic against the Romans and wiped them out.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that as someone who actually believes magic is something that exists in the world. Until you give me direct evidence of it occurring, I'm going to go with no. And until we have what was that one TV show, the 4400? Was that what it
The
was called?
4400. Yeah.
Yeah. When the Romans suddenly come back and say, "Hey
Yeah.
guys, we were abducted by aliens in the year 100 or whatever,"
Yep.
I'm not going to look at this favorably.
Right.
It
So
is a UFO in the gaps. Go ahead.
yeah. So here's the only thing that I will say. Sure, everything that I'm about to say could also, bolster this idea of they just left. Like they got destroyed and the last remnants, cheesed it and went elsewhere. But we're talking about an existence in a world that the Bible leaves all the room in the world for magic being real. The Bible doesn't say avoid these things because they're fake. Just saying.
Mhm.
And B, we have, because of literature and the linguistic stylings, this idea of heaven above, hell below. Now, we're not going to get into the conversation of whether or not you believe in hell or whatever.
Yes.
But regardless, that's the imagery, right? And even down to the Jewish rituals and things like that the burnt offerings going up in smoke, and the way that so it's all laid out, right? And but the reality is it's far more plausible that we're talking about a situation where it's a different plane of existence rather than like you keep going up and eventually you get to heaven. You keep going down, eventually you're going to get to hell, sort of thing. So if we're and I levy all of that out because we're on a channel that proclaims a Christian worldview, just one that is
Yes.
willing to ask the questions and things like that. So I'll play ball and say, okay, let's put it within the parameters of what we would what the Bible speaks to and allows for and all of that kind of stuff. No problem. I still think even within those paradigms, this idea of them being whisked away to a different dimension is still on the table. I think there's and I think the further that we get down the road of quantum theory, the more potential there is in this idea that there are parts of the world in what has been historically remote parts of the world in relation to the rest of civilization and history and all of that kind of stuff, where there could be these spots where be it from some entity or group of entities or something like that, or just a weak spot in a dimensional rift that next thing you know, you're on Earth 2.
Yeah. I agree. It's possible. It's one of those things you can't just discount it out of hand because it sounds weird and wacky.
Yeah.
Even though it's probably not the answer. But I think what stuff like that does is distracts from actual answers. You know?
That was the most diplomatic way I have ever heard somebody tell me that I'm wrong in my life. That was phenomenal. You need to run for office, bro. Like that was so diplomatic.
Yeah, because it's not like I can discount out of hand, like, no, these things don't happen because I believe things are possible. These
Yeah.
things could happen. But as far as like that's what I'm going to put my I don't know, answer faith behind in how this actually occurred. And I know that's not what you were saying. It I can't do that in good faith. You know?
So my only thing is any of these other ones to me, if you have something that is largely documented and you're relying on gaps in windows in the history books in order to slot these people into, that to me reads more like a gap an argument out of a gap
Mhm.
than a supernatural explanation to the whole thing.
Yes.
And so I think when we're looking at periods of time like this, I I I think that if most of it is cataloged and all of that, we need to leave room for the unexplainable,
Yeah.
because generally if you eliminate a lot of those things that are otherwise explainable minus pockets of time, then all of a sudden things start getting knocked off the list, and those unexplainable aspects of the list start to raise up in potential.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to go, Bible on this, I mean, there is very little archaeological evidence for the Exodus, you know, from Egyptian records versus, we found pottery and blah, 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 and all that mess. And the idea being, if I came up, remove the Bible for a second,
Mhm.
and I said, well, these Israelite people who I'm saying are there, their God just came in, curb stomped everyone here, and said their God was better. That sounds fantastical. That sounds like I don't have evidence to support it. So I get where you're coming from. Using that as a frame of reference, using what little we have, because the Egyptians aren't going to be writing down, hey, by the way, they made Ra look like a fool, made Anubis look like a fool. Like, that's just not good PR.
Yeah, I mean so for those of you keeping track at home, this kid's is called poking the bear. Um um so where I if there wasn't later date um evidence for the Israelite people existing post Exodus and the influence that we can chart through the accounts that we have of the Israelite people, that 100% would have been an evidence of the Egyptian influence, coupled with um, when you look at the biblical account and you look at some of the agricultural studies that have been done and things like that, you kind of have to widen the view in order to get a picture of the Exodus. When you're talking about um, a pound for pound retelling within Egyptian records of the Exodus narrative, no, that doesn't. I will concede that that piece of evidence doesn't exist. When you look at the full scope of everything, yeah, there's a lot of evidence, and that's largely my argument with this. Is I think if you look at these, unless we're talking about a wide scale demolishing, we're just wiping this whole group of people off the map, or a small remnant of people go and just leave, knowing that like they've been shamed, all of this stuff, and if they show their face back in Rome again, they're screwed, and all of that. Those are really the only two physical answers to this, in my opinion, because everything else relies on largely capitalizing on chunks of time that yeah, we don't otherwise have anything to prop it up, like even after the fact, like nobody even bragging or talking about how they destroyed this group of Romans. And it just would seem to me that if that were the case, then there would be more documentation from the winners writing history that, oh, we destroyed this, pathetic and this and that, and spinning it to making it sound like they were ants that were essentially crushed underneath the boot of whatever the opposing force was. At least something that you would be able to point to that says, oh, hey, this points to an explanation.
Yeah, real quick, for those of you concerned, I do think the Israelites were in Egypt. I do believe in actual Exodus. I was just trying to use a more scientific side of things, more historical side of things for the argument.
Christian, don't pull a hamstring backing up out of that one. Just say.
So I knew Joe wasn't concerned about that.
Yeah,
but for your case, I mean, we have Roman records of exactly that thing. Julius Caesar talking about his conquest of Gaul. I came, I saw, I conquered.
Yep.
If that does not happen, that means either those records haven't survived or the people were illiterate. In that case, I would give more to the Caledonians / Celtics and then the Germanic tribes. So yeah, that's why, even though I am going to say Parthian just for the sake of an answer in a bit, I agree in that there should be some record. This is who we beat. This is how many we killed. And by the way, those Romans kind of suck.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we went on that huge tangent. We should probably save the Exodus for the historical Exodus for religious strangeness later on. That sounds like fun. But do you have anything else you want to add before we get to our final kind of like, we're going to take the bullet essentially for this one?
No, I think I'm ready to get into the final judgments.
Okay. So, like I said, I gave it away multiple times over. For the sake of having an answer, even with all the flaws that we've mentioned before, 40-year gap, the fact that there is no official record of this happening, I'm going to say this: the Second Parthian War with Rome that we mentioned is when this Roman legion gets wiped out. Once again, that is based on flimsier evidence. We know a legion was wiped out. They're not named. So, let me just fit that puzzle piece there for the sake of having an answer. I find the Germanic one plausible. I find the Scottish A Caledonian one plausible. But yeah, that's where I'm going to put my cards for right now and see if that works in my favor.
Um, yeah, I think honestly, I think for me, it takes less gymnastics to try and say that something supernatural took place than it does that they were taken out by some opposing force. If it were, then I would be inclined to say Germania. But outside of that, I think you're and to the credit of the Germania and answer, there there are so many very remote um, regions of that part of the world that they're defeated, they're dejected, they're lost in the wilderness, all of that kind of stuff. There's a potential,
Mhm.
and you could argue that they're just, you know, that they died in some remote area, and history just hasn't found them yet or anything like that. To me though, I've got to go with that more of a mystical sort of answer, that they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and they got swept away.
Fair enough. A surprise reversal into how things normally were. The rational Joe decides to go mystical. The
Yeah.
irrational Christian decides to go rational. Are either of us right? Who knows? That's the fun of doing this. That's why we've been talking for 50 some minutes about something that we still don't know. And we get to have fun speculating. We have to get the fun putting out pet theories and hypotheses. And I always mess up hypotheses and theories. And I know there are actual scientific terms for how they're supposed to be defined. So there's that thing. So,
Yeah.
what do you guys think? Where did the Roman legion meet their end? Was it one of these locations or wars we mentioned or magical circumstances beyond their control? Or is there some other explanation for that loss? We didn't touch everything that history and folklore have on the subject tonight. So let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow up on. In the description below, you can find the sources used for tonight's program. Next time, next month, we will be moving on to our next category, true crime, where I was surprised again by the votes. I put all these serial killers and stuff, but what the good people chose was the mysterious hijacking and theft done in the name of the enigmatic man known as D.B. Cooper. I'm looking forward to that one. I'm ready. We're going to have some fun arguments, I'll bet, on that one. So until next time, guys, see ya.